to our first official talk for Women's History Month. Yay, March. There are several more events coming up, but we want to thank Alison for being our inaugural monthly speaker. As April liked to joke, oh, we get Women's History Month, but that's when spring break is. So we're down a month.
It's not a joke.
I don't think it was intentional when they did it. So I want to thank Alison. Alison will be speaking today about her, I want to call it her one-woman biking show in Vietnam. She biked all through, cycled, I guess. My husband who rides a bicycle is always hollering at me. It's like, oh, you make us sound like we're getting on hogs. Well, I know she wasn't, but the bicycling through Vietnam, as I like to joke, at this point I barely go to the grocery store by myself. Alison went and bicycled all through Vietnam. So I want to introduce her, although I know most of you know her as one of our eminent librarians. She serves us in the archival position and helps with many other things. She's always willing to pitch in. Is everybody in the library? I do like to give a shout out to our IUSB library when I can because they're so great. Yay! They're more than helpful to me. Alison received her bachelor's degree from Antioch College, and she received her master's degree in library science with an archival administration concentration in 2002 from Wayne State University. She has served as the technician at the Reuther Library Archives at Wayne State University. I know that she also served as the reference archivist at the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati from 2002 to 2004. And since 2004, we have been lucky to have her here at IUSB. So I would like to introduce Alison, and she will speak for a little bit. She's coming up a slideshow. I think it's on a oh my God. It's Women's History Month, so that's part of it. This happens in class. I usually make a joke that I'm not being recorded then. A 6-second timer. Yes, my mind is in the gutter always. A 6-second timer. And so she will be showing the slides as she gives us a talk, and at the end I think she is available for taking questions. So I'd like to ask you to help me welcome Alison for her talk.
Let me just put it on rotate there. So thank you guys, everybody, for everybody coming from the talk. I see a lot of friendly faces that I know from both my campus colleagues, some of my students, friends from the community, some MBA, Michiana Bicycling Association folks. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much to the IUSB Gender Studies program for sponsoring this talk and asking me to speak as well. It's a real honor. It really is. Because I'm a feminist, and I'm a woman, and I'm a traveler, and I want everybody to, if there's some takeaway here, one of my goals is to impart some love of international travel for everybody, and think about traveling near and far, but also think about traveling solo, particularly if you're a woman. So, and I want to leave a lot of time for discussion of the slides. Hopefully, these are all of my images. There's close to over 150 photos here. So if anything pops up in your brain and you want to know more, or engenders discussion, just shout out at the end. I'll do a little bit of a talk. So I went in last summer to Vietnam in July of 2015, and it was nothing short of amazing. Vietnam was all new to me, and it's a place that in my brain has been a big part for a lot of reasons. And I think in part that's because the age I am, and that it's it's a place that a lot of Americans don't go to. I feel like there's much more that I need to learn about Vietnam, and I definitely want to go back. So with all of that as context, I'm a woman who loves to travel, and I'm a traveler who happens to be a woman. And I've traveled a lot through the years internationally. Since I was a little kid, I am lucky enough to have family who live in London. So growing up, I've had London as kind of a jumping off place where our family gathered, and we were able to travel pretty extensively throughout the UK, and then points beyond in Europe. And that's been a real bonus to me and a joy. And every spring about this time, and so now I'm thinking about a similar trip in April, that I am going to be, what am I going to be doing for my summer vacation is always my thought, and I sort of start a lot later. Frankly, I hate planning trips, but I got to thinking, I just had turned age 40, and I thought, so I've been throughout Europe. It's been fantastic. I have people that I can stay for free with in London. I can do, some kind of other cycling trip like I've done solo throughout Europe or the UK. I've done a lot of trips solo throughout the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, France. Just cycled a few weeks ago with friends in Mexico, and I think we're all still glowing from that trip. So I cycled with family, friends, solo, but it was really, I think this time around, I was like, okay, so I'm 40, and I'm ready to see another part of the world, basically. I'm ready to go. Where is that? So that started in my mind brewing, and I talked with some friends, and my friend Shayna, who is the professional photographer and a fellow traveler to Mexico, she suggested to get me started a site on a group in Facebook that I found really helpful, and I started to talk with solo women travelers. So check it out if you haven't yet. And there's a lot of sites that are out there devoted to women traveling and women traveling solo, and just how to do it and maybe where to go and considerations, and a lot of encouragement to do it. There are a lot of sites that discourage women too, also. And I can't tell you every year the number of times when I tell people about my impending trip wherever I'm going, I get a lot of encouraging comments, but oftentimes I'll get, all by yourself? Aren't you scared? Alone? Wow, you're brave. And I always think, well, I don't know about brave. I do know that I love it, and I love exploration. I love adventure. Whether I'm here in Michiana or I'm on another continent, I'm always adventuring, and it's usually by bicycle. And it's a way I can join all of those loves together. And I believe that solo travel is a special kind of travel, and it's something that I've done since my 20s, backpacking in Europe, kind of cliche but awesome, and then going from hiking to traveling by bike solo. And I've found that solo travel has really, as a woman, has really empowered me. Another slight cliche, but it's true. Solo travel has really made me think about who I am and how I interact with a place. And I think it connects me even closer with a place that I'm in, whether it's Vietnam or the Netherlands or wherever I am, more closely than if I'm, or in a different way than if I'm traveling with friends. It's just a different kind of beautiful experience. But you learn a lot about yourself when you travel solo. And when you enjoy time with yourself, that's a gift. And it's something that I believe that all of us can cultivate. And I want to especially put a plug out there for women to think about cultivating, because we are not encouraged to be solo in any respect anyway, but then we are discouraged to travel solo more often than we're encouraged. So this is one of my plugs for the talk. April comes along, I'm looking at the Facebook group, I'm discussing with these women from all over the world. I talked to another dear friend, one of our other Mexico travel mates who had to work today, like a lot of my friends, who happens to be first generation from India. So she talked with some of her relatives who basically said, don't let a friend travel to India. The rape rates are up in the countryside right now. So, who knows? I'd love to go to India at some point in my life, but this past year was not the year for me to go. And so I surfed around on the internet a little bit more, and a lot of sites kept popping up. Vietnam is one of the most secure and safe places for women to travel alone. And so I pursued that, and like I say, I actually really hate planning trips. So I went fast and easy and put a web search in for cycling tour groups and contacted a few of them. I went with the one that was the most communicative with me and the cheapest, and they were awesome. And it was a team of women in Hanoi who run this touring group, and they put together a trip for me that was pretty fantastic. So I started in Hanoi in mid-July. I was a shot from Hanoi, and I stayed in Hanoi for two days, basically, 2 full days, and it is an amazing city in a lot of ways. It's an ancient city, it's fascinating, it's the most chaotic place that I have ever been in. The streets have no traffic laws, if you can imagine that. No stop signs. There are these wagon wheel intersections that were built by the French, so sort of pre-car. There are no signs to regulate that traffic. They'll have a cop in a little house in the middle or on a corner of that wagon wheel, and you just, if you're a pedestrian, however you're getting around, you just try to make eye contact and move forward and kind of push through with the other pedestrians if you're lucky, and dodge the traffic, which is mostly motorbike, because people can't, of course, really afford cars. There's a few cars, particularly in Hanoi, but people mostly get around by motorbike, particularly up in the mountains, where then I went after Hanoi, because that's what people can afford. A few bicycles, a lot of people walking. It's a fascinating city. In Hanoi, I would say the things that really stood out to me was the memorial that I visited, and there it is, right there, right on time, for Ho Chi Minh. And if you guys know, Ho Chi Minh is the national hero of Vietnam. He was the leader against the various colonial forces that have plagued Vietnam through the years. First the Japanese, and then the French colonial powers, and then finally the US-backed Southern Army. And as we know, that battle, and it's a complex one, and we can talk about that if we want to, but you know, that Vietnam won the war, not America, right? So Ho Chi Minh has become a national hero. He is omnipresent too. There are several slides where I was in cities, I was in towns, I was in villages, and his image is everywhere. People will have photos of him in the most humble of homes, in shacks that I visited. They'll have his photo next to the rest of the family, and or on the wall, or in a family shrine. It's pretty fascinating to see. He's known as Uncle Ho. He's everywhere. Every place you go, you'll see him multiple times a day. Let me think what I wanted to think about next. I just don't want to miss anything. Oh, just the other thing in Hanoi, because sort of I'm thinking chronologically about after Hanoi, because it was a real changing of gears and a real switch. The other place that I went to, instead, along with walking for hours and hours and hours in this fascinating city and just exploring and hopefully getting to know it a little bit, was Wan Kim Lake. And that's a really interesting place because for hundreds of years it's a sacred spot. It's right in the heart of the city. And there's a temple on an island in the middle of the lake. And it's a beautiful spot. It's super serene in the middle of the most, again, chaotic and bustling city that I've ever been to. And in the temple lives a tortoise that is a national symbol for Vietnam, and that is a symbol of the city, the country's independence and strength against adversity. So it's a real spot. It's a spot that's dear to the heart of a very patriotic country. And it's also a spot that's where people come to check each other out, to go for walks. Kids come to play. It's really a beautiful place. So, like I say, from Hanoi, I took a midnight train up all night, hours and hours and hours. I got there at 5:30 in the morning, up at the Chinese border in the city of Lokai, which was built by the French in the 1920s as a trading spot, not only to move practical goods like lumber, agricultural goods, that kind of thing, but also a lot of opium. And of course, that's been, kind of the quote unquote dark side of Vietnam and other parts of Asia through the years. And it should be noted, interestingly, that of course, as we know, opium sometimes becomes heroin. During the Vietnam War in America, that's when heroin rates went through the roof. Might there be a connection? Maybe. So I was up at this most northern point, and there's a shot or two, I think, of myself at the Chinese border. And that's where I met the guide that I traveled with, whose name is Dang Nguyen, and then our driver, who is Hung Nguyen. There's no relation. So Dang is 29, he's now 30. He's university educated. His English was pretty good, and obviously he was my translator because I have French, and I can kind of play around in countries, with the Romance languages where I don't speak the language, and I've done that a lot through the years. But I have no grasp of a language as complex and different as Vietnamese. So I really depended on him, and he was fantastic. Our driver, Hung, was interesting in many ways, but he's 63 and he started driving, unlike a lot of Vietnamese, because as you hear, most Vietnamese can't afford cars, don't have cars. He had his own SUV and was an agent to hire for these touring companies throughout the country to take tourists around. He started his career driving and was able to put his kids through university, which also most Vietnamese don't get to do, by participating in the war for the North. He was a transport for on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So that was pretty interesting. He didn't want to talk about the war. Go figure. Pretty interesting. But we were in some of the same territory that he started in, probably a Jeep, traveling through that mountainous region that we were in. So we started out in the Sapa Valley in Lokai, like I say, and we traveled and we went further east, and we really hit that border on the east in the north. I haven't yet been to the south of Vietnam, and I understand it's very different. It's a chance or an excuse for me to get back to Vietnam. And just, it was, I mean, what unfolded after that was days of, you know, I mean, insert your cliche here. I mean, days of wonderment. This is a country unlike one that I'd ever been to before in a lot of different ways. So here's Thang, there's Hung, and those were some women who are, speaking of gender, interesting little side note. So Hung is married, long time. In fact, not many people have tattoos. He happens to have a homemade tattoo on his arm of a woman's head and some text. And I asked Dang, like, so what's up with Hung's tattoo? And he said, yeah, so his friend did it, you know, with an ink and a needle right when he got enlisted in the Army, because he had gotten married 5 days before that to his, you know, teenage sweetheart. Still married to her, but cheating all over the country on her now. So those two women that we were having lunch with were his girlfriends. I don't know what extent that goes to, but apparently he has many ladies that we, you know, met up with in different towns that we went through, and they might be in the South too. So that was kind of interesting. I'll say the other two spots in my travels that gender really made a difference to me and that I noticed were, the first was the only time that I ever felt halfway in danger, and frankly not so much so. I've had more dangerous situations, I think, as a woman, both here in Michiana, here in the US, and in other countries that I've been to. I was cycling solo up one of these crazy high mountains that you guys are seeing. This is the most mountainous cycling that I personally have ever done any place in my life. And myself as a cyclist who cycles every day, and I go through withdrawals when I can't bike, like this was the most challenging cycling that I've ever done in my life. So I'm literally, you know, like going up one of these crazy mountains by myself, and it's super remote, and all of a sudden a motorbike pops up like beside me and like hovers because I'm, you know, going like 5 miles per hour because I'm working so hard and sweating. I don't sweat that much, but it was hot in Vietnam. It's a tropical country, right? So this guy, and it is a guy, you'll see people often wear coverings over their mouth, both to mostly and a lot in Hanoi because there's no pollution regulations. And so the pollution is pretty rough. I would imagine If one had asthma, it would be a hard country to live in. Anyway, a lot of people cover their mouths. And so this guy, he had a helmet on, he had his mouth covered, he's all covered up. I can't see, to ID him if he's gonna mess with me, who he is. And he's just hovering, and he's like kind of menacing, like just waiting for me to sort of join up, like he's got his hand, because a lot of people on bikes, if you're traveling by bike and you're going up the mountains, people help each other out. This is a developing country where people don't have money, and motorbikes, because they have more power, will hold their hands out to cyclists, and you get to travel a little bit. We did that a couple of times when we were cycling. It's pretty cool. So he's doing that, and I'm like, and it got to the point where I'm like, yeah, no thanks. And he's just not letting me go. So that was irritating. He finally, I'm at that point, I'm like yelling and telling him to F off, and he's just, he finally left me alone. And then the other time that I really found gender to be pronounced in my trip was the very last night, and there are a couple of slides in here of that dinner. So I stayed 2 nights at the very end, right before I went back to Hanoi. It took 6 hours to drive back through the mountains south to Hanoi. We stayed with a family who was really great, and there's several shots of their home too. This was in the Ba Bay National Park, which is an incredible, beautiful spot on Earth. And it's got this amazing freshwater lake that's massive, and we went boating in there, and it's got limestone caves. Anyway, it was incredible. Stayed there a couple of days, stayed with this family, and we all made, both the men and the women, together made this 7-course incredible dinner with fresh fish caught like literally hours before that from the lake, local greens, bananas from the trees in their yard. Like, it was an incredible dinner. And so that morning before the nighttime and before we all made the dinner together, Thang was cycling with me, and we were going through the villages in the park, and he was sort of, laying out the landscape of the dinner, and he's like, so the guys, we're gonna go ahead and drink after the meal. And I think you'd be really comfortable if you, like the other women, go ahead and retreat. They're just gonna clean up and retreat. And I was like, yeah, no. I'm used to, pretty equal group dynamics here. And I'm a feminist, like I say, so I balked. And it's the one time, and in a super nice way, I think we were both super diplomatic, but me and Thang just kind of went head to head a little bit. We negotiated. I negotiated with him. I'm like, I want to be there. That sounds like fun. I'm not a drinker, but the idea of extending the party, having more food, and they're also drinking the local corn liquor, which one of these slides, we actually went to this little home of people up in the mountains who make this. A lot of people make this in their home. And that stuff is strong. I mean, I was on a full stomach and I got drunk. I mean, part of it is that I don't drink, so that's part of it. But anyway, so I negotiated, right? I said, I want to be there. And he said, oh, okay. And I'm sure he had to talk to that family. There's a shot of that meal where you can see the mother of the family kind of looking. So the women are sitting sort of cordoned off to the side. They have kids. There were a couple of other Vietnamese travelers, a couple of truck drivers who had also fought in the war. They were really cool, who were also staying there. So we're having this massive meal with lots of people. You can see the mom kind of looking at me in the picture as we're toasting with this corn liquor. She's not pleased that I'm joining in. So that was interesting. Those are the times where I felt that it was marked that I was a woman. Otherwise, I honestly, traveling in Vietnam, there are places that I've traveled to where it's been much more clear that, you know, I'm a woman, and you know, I am definitely, I like to think I have some pretty developed street smarts, and I know in those situations that I have to have my street smarts, you know, full on all the time. Yeah, so there we go. So you can see her. She's looking at me. She's not the happiest of campers. So that was an interesting piece there. And there they are. It's one of the places we stayed. So I guess I'll just wrap it. But I just, you know, want to invoke and say again, think about traveling, everyone here. Think about traveling internationally. And women, think about traveling solo. Really, seriously, it's a joy. And I think that if you haven't before, you will find a new way of engaging with a place that you travel to. You'll find confidence, and you'll find love of yourself. I really think that, because that's what I've found. So I'll stop right now, and I'll just let you guys hopefully have questions for me.
Let's applaud them.
Yes, April.
Well, I have about 1 million, but I'll just ask one now. And I wanted to just make an observation of something that I learned from a student, a term called the wild effect. So people have actually studied what happened after Cheryl Strayed published her book, Wild. The number of women who began hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And the number of women who began, you know, they do these Google algorithm searches, just the number of women who began searching for sites devoted to women traveling alone. So I just think it's such an interesting term and a reminder of how important it is that people share these stories of these trips, because they offer models of empowerment the way you are. With that in mind, though, I guess I just wanted to repeat something you said that is a pretty horrifying phrase, and that is when you mentioned sort of offhand, the rape rates in India are way up. So the fact that there is something that we would refer to as a rape rate is pretty unsettling, and it reminds us, you know, of course we know all bodies are vulnerable, but the patterns are that women are much more likely to be victimized. So I just wondered if you, what you found on sites, those you know, women traveling alone sites that address that. Are they, what precautions, you know, the weight then is on the woman not to be victimized,
right.
Which is, you know, a deeply problematic dynamic. But I just wondered how people talked about it, how they kind of walked that line of, you can do it, but be really careful. So I'd love to hear you say just a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting when you're looking at these sites, how much they vary. So a lot of them are, and I did make up a list because, you know, I'm an information professional and I can't help myself. But, you know, a lot of them are very encouraging and say things a lot like what I was saying. You know, you will find love of yourself. You'll find love of the place in a different way than you will if you're with other people. Do it. There are a lot of sites, though, that are either written by women or some by men that are discouraging, very discouraging. And some of the things in particular that they say are, you know, don't walk at night by yourself. We hear that, of course, about, you know, wherever you are locally, right? And, you know, the possibility of women, if you're not married or paired up with someone, buying a cheap and fake wedding ring and wearing that. I'm trying to, because I block it out. I'm trying to think of some of the other discouraging things, or really cautionary things that they tell. And some of the points are critical. When you are traveling with a woman, it is different than if you're a man. You just have to be more aware. I would say, you know, sort of the drumbeat or the main thing that these sites have in common is they're saying always be aware, and you know, have cell phone access if you can. That was one thing when that guy was trailing me on his motorbike that kind of like freaked me out for a second and did come to mind, is that up in those mountains I have no cell phone access. Not until I come to whatever village that we end up in at the end of the day does that village give me internet access. And then I was able to load all of these pictures into Facebook. And then also the language factor. You know, if I'm having to call for help, there's no humans around me at that point. I'm up in the middle of these mountains. And then if I try to use my telephone, it's not going to do anything for me. So. Good question. Yeah, I mentioned it to them. Questions?
Okay, so I just would like to know how many days were you in Vietnam, and probably every day was slightly different, but could you tell us just a little bit more about what an average day was like when you get up, and when you eat your meals, and what you do in the evening, and if you're biking all night too, or
Yeah.
tell us more about what a day was like.
Sure. Yeah. So I was there for total of, I have the itinerary here too, 16 days, and then I was biking for 13 of the days, something roughly like that. So, you know, just shy of 3 weeks basically. And when I got up into the mountains, which was the bulk of my trip, because then so I ended up for 2 days on the tail end back in Hanoi, or like a day and a half. So that's, there's commentary here, but an average day would be like, we got started pretty early, especially because it was so hot for the cycling portion. We'd wake up, and my brain and body are all kinds of jet lagged, right? So the clock doesn't mean anything to me. I usually do pretty good with jet lag, so I slipped right in. We'd start out at about like 7 in the morning. We'd all meet up at wherever we were staying, whether it was with a family or at, you know, the hotel. And from there we would go to usually start out with some cycling, usually get our water at the market because there's no treated drinking water. That was one thing that Vietnam taught me. If you guys haven't traveled in a developing country, don't take treated water for tap water that we can drink. Don't take that for granted. It's huge. Hundreds of people in Vietnam and go down the countries have illnesses and die every year because they don't have treated water. So we'd buy our water, get some kind of snacky things for breakfast, cycle for most of the morning, and then we'd usually get into the SUV, and we had 3 bikes also. The idea was that we needed a bike to switch out because people not only don't have bikes here because they can't afford them up in these little villages, but there's no one who knows how to repair them. If people have bikes, they're very simple one-speeders. And ours weren't incredibly fancy, but they were mountain bikes, and I needed them like that to cycle through this terrain. So we'd travel usually to a next place, have some lunch, sometimes meet up with some of Hung's girlfriends in whatever town we were going to. And they were always really cool women, and usually they were a lot younger than him, so they knew a few words of English, so that was friendly for me. Have an awesome lunch, and we often traveled the market. The markets in Vietnam are incredible. Blew my mind. I took a lot of pictures that you guys are seeing of the markets. There's the corn liquor. This was in the home. So there's the corn back there. They're distilling. That's the final dinner. So we all, men and women, with the fish that was caught in the lake, we all prepared that dinner together. So then usually in the afternoon, we'd kind of see a point of interest, whether it was, it was different every time, but something like going boating on a lake, in a river, or going to a market, meeting up with families in their homes. And these were people that Thang knew, and he just made no prior arrangements, but they were so giving of their time and so warm and hospitable and just no language between us, right? But just so welcoming to me and excited to see me. So I met a lot of great families in homes in the villages that we traveled through. And usually then, sort of pre-nightfall, I would cycle, usually alone, in the nighttime until it got dark. And then we'd get to whatever town we stayed in or village. And the night markets are awesome. Everybody's up, including little kids, are up until whatever, midnight, maybe after. And so here's a night market in Hanoi. There's a shrine up there in a tree, which is pretty amazing. There's a wedding I ran into in Hanoi, right next to the Hoan Kim Lake. So there's a market. And so you're seeing different ethnic groups too, that Vietnam is amazing in its diversity. There are no fewer than 54 ethnic groups in the country. The biggest ethnic group is the Viet group, and that's the predominant national language is Vietnamese. But I went through villages where people, and that gives you an idea of the chaos of Hanoi. I went through villages where people have lived together for generations and generations, hundreds of years, and dress differently. They have different language, they have different customs, but they live cheek by jowl together. It's pretty fascinating. And it is so interesting. Not only are the markets incredible, but to see the different patterns of dress and people, and obviously some modern, Western dress, but people living so closely together and generations, and some people can only exchange a few words of basic Vietnamese to get business done, to get questions answered that you might with anybody in your city or your town. So that's pretty interesting. Tom, I know you had your hand
I was
raised.
curious about, you described the incident with the person on the motorbike, but you also talked about the two men who were obviously with you at some point. So where were they at all that? I mean, would they like turn you loose and you would go like out front?
Yeah.
Like, sideway?
Right. So the SUV had enough space for our luggage. I always travel light, so our packs, and then the three bikes in back. So Hung obviously was always in the vehicle, right, because he's the driver. Dang, that's where I was sort of getting at, is we'd usually double up in the morning to cycle together, and I really enjoyed talking with him. Both those guys, I just came to deeply respect through all of those days, and we really were together, like all the time, so I better like him. That thing and I then would cycle together until about the midday when it got super hot, and then I would be on my own to cycle later in the day usually. I know some of my colleagues have to teach at 1, so thank you for coming, and thanks for introducing Andrea. And that tells me what time it is. Thanks, Monica. Yeah.
Being that was your first time there, did you find it hard to, I guess, keep cycling because you want to stop and look at so many things?
Oh my God. Yes. Like having an iPhone is like crack. I was like, every 3 seconds, I'm like, that's amazing, and I'd be like, yeah, so they're waiting for me in the next village. You better like get going, especially because I've cycled with you before. I'm a slow cyclist, so
Well, I am too, and that's why I asked, because I'm the same way. I'll stop if I get a new place. I want to stop and look at everything, and other people with you. It's like, come on, let's go.
Yeah. So when I was with these guys, that's their career. Both of these guys are agents for hire, and that's what they do, and they work hard. They travel with tourists. They're used to gawkers, people taking their time and being in this amazing place for the first time in their life or returning. They're used to people and super patient. Bless their hearts. They were amazing. So.
One other question. Was there areas that I know, on the bicycle thing going up the mountain, was there other areas that you didn't really feel safe in, or just because it wasn't the right area, or?
You mean in terms of like cycling specifically?
Yeah. Like if you was on your own somewhere.
Being on my own doesn't throw me. But in terms
like
of cycling and like terrain, again, Vietnam being a developing country, the roads are not awesome. So, you're lucky if you get, nicely paved roads. There were a lot of roads. This was kind of interesting. There were some spots where I was up in the mountains, and all of a sudden you'd be going up and up and up and around, and there were crews doing it by hand, laying roads. So with big rocks as the base layer, and then laying some kind of asphalt over it. So there were a lot of stretches where I had to walk my bicycle. And folks were like, wherever I went, I was an oddity, but treated respectfully. But I was definitely, I was in an area of Vietnam where not a lot of other Vietnamese from other parts of the country travel to. It's that remote, let alone Westerners, let alone a woman traveling solo. So, the number of times that I heard, hello, practicing their English, or Hollywood, or pizza. It was kind of cute. Sometimes, you know, for the 64th time in a day, it's like, hi, and you know they have no idea that you've said that 63 times before that. And it's always really, it's so warming. So, any other questions that folks have? Yeah.
You had mentioned something about the beauty standard there that I thought was interesting, how hard they work to meet that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that is gendered. People really, and that's part of a reason why also why people cover so much, even though it's like ferociously hot, is they don't want to get the sun. The beauty standard, particularly for women, is lighter skin. And so a lot of that, though, has to do with class. Because, of course, if you're outdoors working all the time, you're going to have darker skin, and it's going to show what class you are. And that has gone on for generations. Very interesting. So in the places that I went to that would serve as pharmacies of any kind or a store, there tended to be at least one skin whitening product that was available. And yeah, there are a lot of people also in the markets who sell these really light jackets that cover, and I think there are a few pictures of them, they cover like every living inch of you. And so if you have the mouth cover, a lot of people will walk around with that on, and then they have their hood on, and so you get next to no sun that way. So that is interesting. Yes?
I know some developing countries going against generalization, sometimes the disabled are sort of invisible. In some countries I've seen, you see more visibility, and I'm thinking layering of, the injured from the war and then the disabled. And your pictures are, I'm not scrutinizing them here, but I didn't see, like people who had polio or people who had, a hip, disfigurement, these kind of things. Do you see that?
I did, and something that I really did notice was, particularly in Hanoi, so a lot of people, because it's so impoverished, are forced to beg, in various situations. A lot of the guys who have been injured in the war, particularly in the big city of Hanoi, are either in a wheelchair, super simple, like, basic wheelchair, or they're on crutches. And they might have a limb missing. And they have a sign, usually in English, that says, war wounded, give freely, or something like that. So it is notable. Yeah.
There was a documentary that was up for the short, and it was about Agent Orange, the Napoleon, and I don't know how many people saw it, but we saw it at Notre Dame. And the millions just, it just staggers. Yeah. So I'm always thinking about how many homes I was in developing countries that I see they're invisible because they weren't begging, they were in their home. It's always what you don't see too in the public space.
Yeah, it's important to note. And in particular, there's that, like you say, there's that extra layer of the war that created a whole another set of people who were disabled as well, physically challenged for the rest of their lives, and they have to scrape by. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm a little reluctant to ask this, but I know Vietnam is opening up to the wider world now, and so oftentimes with that comes the bad as well as the good. And so I was wondering, did you come across any examples of sex tourism, especially in Illinois, probably not in the villages?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think, because I've seen that in other countries. I think it wasn't so readily apparent to me because of maybe where I traveled. I think I did see some loitering women where it was pretty clear in Hanoi, but not in the villages. But I don't know that I'd say that it was more marked than any other big city that I've been to. But again, you know, this is why I have to go back, because there may be things on many levels that I'm not seeing and I want to learn more about. So
Mr. Hung probably knows.
I would say he probably is versed in that, yeah. Yeah, April.
So I think I'm going to bring up the conclusion here,
Yeah.
since we're just about at 1 o'clock, and I want to
Yeah.
make an announcement of a couple things that are coming up this month. If you don't know me, I'm April Ladinsky. I'm the director of the Women's and Gender Studies program here, and Andrea had to go teach school, because that's what we pay her to do here. So, but I just wanted to mention, apropos your comment, Theo, that in the 19th century, it really was bicycles that allowed women to be out in public without being seen as streetwalkers. That literally put them on machines. And so Susan B. Anthony very famously said that the bicycle did more to improve women's emancipation than almost anything else in the 19th century. So bicycles have, since the beginning, really been important to women's suffrage, and many called them freedom machines, which certainly you're modeling here. So I just wanted to remind people that even though we're crammed at the end of the month of March, we have 3 more events for Women's History Month, which you can find on purple posters all over our campus and also on the Women's and Gender Studies page if you look under W on the A to Z index at IUSB. Tomorrow we're showing the movie Suffragette, which showed in Michiana for about 30 seconds
Yes.
in November. We're showing it along with ADP tomorrow at 5:30 in YCamp 1001. So that's the British story of the fight for the right to vote. Next week there's a talk on Tuesday at 6:30 at the Civil Rights Heritage Center by Kathy Jonas about the women who organized at the Ball Band Uniroyal Factory landmark gender discrimination suit. And then the following next Thursday, we're showing the brand new documentary Trapped, which is showing only in large cities in the U.S. And you know, we paid the money to have it come here to show you for free at 7 p.m. That's an EA 1011 next Thursday, which contextualizes the whole women's health case before the Supreme Court right now. So really interesting discussions coming up. And Alison, thank you so much for everything you do on our campus and in our community.
Thanks.
We'll go up and more how much you can go to talk about as well. So thanks so much for coming, everybody.
Thanks everyone so much.